Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Will, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to talk with you and about your work, your very important work, and how it ties into the theme this year on Conflict Managed, which is talking about generations at work. But before we get to your work, I want to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Yeah, I've had the chance to reflect on this a little bit, and I'd say my first real job, I guess, was caddying. But um, in terms of my first job throughout college or internships and things like that, I had an internship in recruiting and also real estate. I did some sales jobs, but my first job was, if you ever have seen the thing with like Costco where they hand out the different types of samples. I was doing some of that sampling at Costco and handing out different things like that. But that was a little bit about my first job. Definitely learned a lot throughout my college experience, being able to have different internships and some of those seasonal jobs, and it taught me a lot about what I'm doing with my work today. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. What a variety. Sometimes people find one first job and they stay with it for 4 years or whatever, and then they move on to their first professional job, which is wonderful. But I think it's really nice when you have a variety of experiences in different settings. I mean, the setting of being a caddy versus the setting of being in Costco. What was it like working in Costco and where people are coming up for food? What was that experience like? What was the management like?
Yeah, I think definitely that was a really unique experience. And I think each job that you have, like there are transferable skills from each job that help you in other jobs. And I think that's what's been really cool for me is, I could be doing an internship in real estate, and then there's things that would probably be applicable to what I'm doing at, a simple job such as passing out samples at Costco. But I think some of the things that I learned from that experience was being able to present in a concise way to customers. I think that's one of the biggest skills that isn't really talked about as much in school, is this idea of like being able to get out your point relatively quickly. You hear about the 30-second elevator pitches or things like that. You don't have 5 to 10 minutes to be walking through everything about the product or about the food or the drinks that you're serving. I think it's really about, well, tell me a little bit about it in like 15 to 20 seconds. So it really taught me the ability to be concise and to be brief and to be intentional with my words. So that's one of the skills that I definitely learned from that job.
That is golden. I mean, it's so true. This ability to sum something up really quickly. I think something if you could give a 10-page, presentation or, a 30-deck slide about it, and if you can do the elevator pitch, because you have to know the ins and outs of what it is to be able to pick out what you're going to highlight, what you think is going to resonate with the person in front of you. What are the what are their either pain points or desires, or what is it that this product or this service is what they're looking for in this very short, you have their attention for a few moments before they're going on to
Yeah.
something else. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely a good learning experience.
So what did you major in college?
I studied psychology and I took some business classes. I took some entrepreneurship classes, which foreshadowed what I'm doing now. But yeah, definitely enjoyed psychology. Always was interested in understanding why people do the things they do, what motivates them. So there were certain classes that I loved, and then there were other classes that weren't necessarily my favorite in psychology. But overall, I'm very glad I took that major because it's definitely been applicable with the work I'm doing now.
So when you decided to major in psychology, did you originally think maybe you wanted to be a therapist or a researcher or
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. So I did think about going into therapy. It's funny, I had a podcast myself. I think I might have told you about it throughout college. I had a podcast, just kind of there's the term shrink for therapists. And I had a podcast called 19-Year-Old Shrink throughout college, where it was a self-development and mental health podcasts helping young adults navigate, the uncertainties of the college years and young adulthood. And it was during the time of COVID. So there was a lot of uncertainty for young adults, and I wanted to be able to, help people in that way and hear from someone who's also in a similar stage of life as they are. So there actually was that desire to go down a therapy route early on in college, but I think it started to shift more into business, and I'm definitely very grateful for the work that therapists do, and it was definitely something I was interested in. But I'm very happy with where I'm at now. But yeah, to answer your question, I did consider it.
The 19-year-old shrink, that sounds so interesting. So it's one thing to have the idea, it's another thing then to do it. So tell us about that experience. Like, how long did you have it? What did you discover as you were talking to people of your own age? I imagine that was mostly you were talking to college students.
So actually, funny enough, I mean, I'd say probably two-thirds of the episodes were me just talking and like solo episodes,
Sure.
giving different experiences throughout college, and then the other third were interviews. Some of them were college kids, like my friends, so I would interview them about, one person navigating divorce in your family and asking questions about that. Then there was another person that was studying screenwriting, and I would essentially be asking him about the psychology behind screenwriting and understanding how you create characters and things like that. So it was interesting to hear his perspective. But yeah, it was a mix of college students that were friends of mine and also people in different industries, sports, in the food and beverage industry, areas like that. So it was definitely from a week to week basis, there was definitely a lot of variety there. There wasn't necessarily, one industry, but I was definitely going from different industries and different topics from week to week.
So you had this idea of maybe being a therapist, but in college, which happens to most of us, we have these ideas, we have courses and experiences, and then we shift. And so you shifted more into thinking that you wanted to go into business, being an entrepreneur, or what was that shift for you?
Yeah, and it's funny. So I thought it would be good. I joined a business fraternity throughout college, and that's really when it started introducing me to this idea of going down the business route, where a lot of the discussion is around interview skills, networking. We would get together and go to different professional events, things like that. So that planted the seed. The entrepreneurship classes, I think, is funny because at the time I was taking the classes, and my dad said, "Oh, it would be good to take those classes." I never thought I would want to go down the entrepreneurship path. But our school had a good program, and I figured it'd be good to take some classes. It would be interesting. So it is funny reflecting back on that when I never thought I would, and now I am. But yeah, definitely. I hope I was answering your question to that. But that's I think there was a shift. I've always enjoyed, and I think the podcast was also another example of me enjoying ideating and creating things from scratch. And I'm seeing that more and more with my passions now as I love creating ideas, and I love the marketing aspect of things and branding and you know making ideas from scratch and bringing them out into reality. So I'm glad I took those classes when I was in college.
It's so interesting, what comes into our life or why we end up taking something, your dad or someone says, "Hey, try this," and then you try it and you don't think it's going to lead to something. But I like the unexpected, but I love this emphasis on creativity. I feel the same way. I love the world of ideas and I love creating. It is just so fun to be able to do something from scratch and it's yours. So like your podcast, you decided what it was, you made the content. And that's what I love about my podcast, the creative aspect and having conversations with people because you don't know what's going to happen. But then also the content, and we're about to talk about your business, but as you develop what your business is, what you're going to offer, how you're going to offer it, and all those parameters, it's wonderful. It can be a lot of other things, very difficult and scary and uncertain. But there's this, if you're a creative person, creativity shows up in so many different ways. So sometimes we just think it's the arts as understood as dancing, singing, painting, but creativity is imbued in all through what we do professionally.
Yeah, definitely. And I do, to add on to that, you sparked an idea in my head where I've been reflecting on this recently. So I'm a youngest child, and this is just my experience. I don't want to say for other people that are youngest childs, but like there was always a set path, meaning, my older brother, he went one way, my older sister went another way. And as the youngest child, like you're not the one who's kind of setting the tone for the rest of your siblings. So you do have that opportunity to follow in your brother's footsteps or follow in your sister's footsteps. But for me, I think as a youngest child, you almost I went to the same high school as my brother, but after that, I always desired to maybe go down a different path than my siblings because it was paved out that way for me. So that's why I ended up going to school on the West Coast when my siblings went to school on the East Coast. I wanted to start a podcast and do all these things because there was this path laid out for me. So I think that's been something that's always been driving me in my life is this creativity, this desire. And again, even if you're not a youngest sibling, that can still come out. But I think for me, I've noticed that there's always been this itch to want to do things a little bit differently than, the people in my life that came before me. So that's another thing that I think has definitely had an influence on my own life too.
That is interesting to think about why we choose what we choose, right? So, and this real desire, I think it has to do with I think part and parcel of the human condition is who are we and how do I bring that about? How do I bring about what I want, what I think the good life is, taking in information from what others are doing, but and others in their kindness or in their experience might offer something, but then to be able to say yes or no to that, to really think about, but what do I want to do? What is my life about? And insofar as we've got people that want the good for us, they want that too, right? Not just what the easy route or what they have, maybe paved the way for, but for everyone to really find what resonates with them and what they're good at and what their vision is.
Yep, totally agree.
So tell us about how you got into the business that you're in right now, your business, the Next Gen Playbook. How did that come about and what is it?
Yeah, so I guess the best place to start is when I was graduating college. I was interviewing for a lot of jobs, and I wouldn't say I was necessarily passionate about the jobs I was interviewing for. It just, again, it felt like that's the thing you do. You're getting ready to graduate college and you interview for jobs and you try and land a position. And it was a little bit discouraging. I wasn't hearing back from different places. And then I was talking to my dad and he said, you know what, Will, why don't you try and make your own job? Why don't you try and go down the entrepreneurial path? Because right now you're at a place where, you're in your 20s, you don't have a family to feed, your expenses aren't as high as they probably will be 10 years from now. That doesn't mean that you won't be paying for things, but like they won't be as high as if when you do have a family. And you might as well take that risk right now. And I, took his advice and I realized that this was an opportunity for me right now to be able to pursue those things and to prioritize that learning and learning from my mistakes and things like that. So it started really with me getting certified with a company called Take Flight Learning, and they work with the DISC assessment. So I was essentially an independent contractor that would, approach different HR people and different companies to try and bring the DISC assessment in and do a training for organizations. And I'm still certified with them and do work with them. But then about a year in, I realized that there really was this need to help bridge the generational gap in the workplace. I was talking with people in so many different industries, and I'm definitely interested to hear your experience with this, but I was talking with a lot of people in different industries, and one of the biggest things that was coming up is that, we're just having a really difficult time understanding the younger generation. And as someone who's a part of the younger generation, I'm 24, so I'm a Gen Zer, I saw it as a unique opportunity to help organizations better understand Gen Z from a Gen Zer's perspective. So that's what led to my work and what I'm doing and with my podcast in the past and a lot of the things that I'm interested in. I've always had kind of a soft spot for young adults and helping them. So whether it's through it doing, organization facilitations, half day sessions, 60 to 90-minute sessions, whether it's through running surveys, it's all about helping the younger generation better understand more experienced employees and helping more experienced employees better understand the the younger generation so that everyone can work better together. So that's what I've been doing. And I love just, again, being able to create something from scratch. The more I do it, the more I learn that I don't know everything. Like the more I go through it, the more I realize how much I don't know. And I think that's such a great thing for me right now. But it's definitely been such an amazing experience. And I'm also working with this online mentorship program called Kindling, which is essentially helping young adults in the early stages of their career with networking, interview skills, understanding or learning what you're passionate about, personal well-being. So it's all these videos of these young adults discussing their experiences, their struggles with this, their successes in these different areas. And that's another thing that I've been working with as well. So I know I just gave you a lot of information, but that's kind of where my career is at right now.
That is so exciting. So I want to go back just a little bit to your doing these disc assessments, right? And leaders are talking to you, or older workers are saying, what are they saying? What I know what people say to me, but what were they saying to you? Like, I just don't understand people your age, or what was their opening to you that you started to hear this kind of these questions over and over?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is this perception of Gen Z being lazy or expecting everything to come to them super early in their careers, being impatient in their careers. So there was a lot, and I will say that I think what's unique about Gen Z, I think every generation has its own experience, but Gen Z is really the only generation right now that doesn't know what a pre-pandemic workforce looks like. So with all the other generations, they might have had 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the workplace. The pandemic hits and it changes the way that they worked forever. So for them, COVID was a disruptor. Some people might have thought it was a good disruptor. Other people might have thought it was a bad disruptor. For Gen Z, yeah, we experienced it in high school or college, but when we entered the workforce, a lot of the changes were already made with remote work, working from home, ideas of flexibility, communication, all those things were really changed. So we start to look at it as this is the expectation. And I think when we have all the generations looking at it as a disruptor and then Gen Z looking at it as an expectation, I think there's naturally going to be some friction there. So I think that's a big factor. Life events are a big factor with that. But some of the big things I've been hearing is, yeah, impatience, laziness, high expectations. And we can get more into that, but I'll stop there.
That is just such an excellent, excellent reminder because whenever we enter the workforce, we think that is normal, right? That's our baseline. That's normal. And everything after that is change, right? So we come in our 20s, and this is what is to be expected. This is what the world of work is like. And then maybe a recession hits, or there's a war, or there's a pandemic, or a famine, or computers come about, the internet comes
Yeah.
about, and what, and so your normal, you have your baseline, and then it constantly is shifting and changing, and you're constantly adapting. And so I agree that I think it's very important when we think about generations and expectations and what is normal or standard really varies. Of course, it varies person to person, but if we're talking generationally, it has a lot to do with life events, your own, but the culture in which what was going on, around you, what was in the air, what are the expectations, the technology, the world events that set up the expectation for what is professional or normal. And so when you look at the world of work, we've got all these different generations bumping around with different expectations as to what is normal, or what is a disruptor or an advance. Um, right. We wouldn't think that anybody in the world of work today, mostly, certainly in the West, are going to think that indoor plumbing or electricity is like this new thing that we got to figure out, right? We all take it as for granted, but there was a time when there wasn't indoor plumbing or there wasn't indoor lighting. And that was a shift from, you can imagine your world of work when there wasn't electricity and then something happened mid-career and all of a sudden there is electricity, right? That would be quite a shift. And and so I think you're right. A lot of these ideas that we have about others at work of course, they're taken from our own experience and our own expectations, but very rarely do we take that step back and think about why I have those expectations or why I think one thing is normal and not thinking about what somebody else's normal is.
That's a great point. And I like what you said about, well, why do I think that way? Because it's one thing to recognize the issues, what are the issues coming up, but being able to peel it back a layer and say, this is the root of this, I think is really important too. And with Gen Z, I could think of so many different things. We've had phones since we were in fifth or sixth grade, and a lot of the advertisements that are being put out there. I remember showing this in a facilitation where you see someone like LeBron James on the Calm app, and it's saying greatness is on the other side of sleep. And then you see an article that talks about why 9 to 5 jobs aren't realistic for everyone anymore. And you start to see all these advertisements out there, and Gen Z is being, given all of these advertisements about these things. But then when you see companies wondering, like, why doesn't Gen Z want to work 12, 13, 14-hour days? Because that's what we had to do when we entered the workforce. And I think that's totally fine for some people, because if you're passionate about something, you might want to work 12, 13, 14-hour days. But I think being able to understand, as you said, like, well, where might this be coming from? Understanding kind of the experience that's unique to our generation, and that a lot of us we're being given all of this information to us since we were young. And of course, we're going to value sleep, mental health, valuing, you hear things about work-life balance. And I have my own like interpretation of what work-life balance looks like, and it might be different to someone else. But I think understanding the root is really important.
And I like that you said what you just said, that you have your own interpretation of work-life balance, and it might be something different for someone else, but that you have it, that you have thought about it at 24, right, I think is indicative of Gen Z, this idea where I think that, I mean, work-life balance isn't obviously a new concept, but the insistence on it, right? Like that it's a given, that it is necessary for mental and physical well-being, that of course we have to have work-life balance. Of course not. I really don't like talking about generations as if everybody, and I'm sure you feel the same way, but it's instead of a nice to have or something to consider, it feels to me that Gen Z is beyond that, is to what is my work-life balance? I'm going to have it. What does it look like? And I might have to play with it. But of course, like a given, I need work-life balance. What do you think about that? Do you think that's your true or?
In terms of you're saying that Gen Z just they prioritize work-life balance, and they see that as kind of a must-have.
Yeah, it's like a natural, like, of course, I'm going to be looking for work-life balance.
Yeah, no, I do think that that's the consensus among Gen Z, is that that is important. And like, I'll give you, for me, I look at work-life balance more in terms of seasons as opposed to day to day, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Meaning, like, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's realistic for me on a day-to-day basis to say that every single day there's going to be perfect work-life balance over time. Like, there's going to be certain days where I'm working way longer than other days. Or there's going to be different seasons of life that are going to be, this is a heavy work season, like, building something up, growing it. But then there might be other times in life where you might not be working as much, and so I think the way I've looked at it is more of understanding, like, there's certain seasons of life that might maintain more of that work, and then there's other seasons where there might be more play and more of that, the relaxation and the fun. But I also look at work-life balance as where my work and my life kind of merge together, and it no longer feels necessarily like work. Because I think the connotation with work-life balance is that work is considered to be the negative and the life is considered to be the positive. So,
Right.
so for me, the work-life balance is this idea of, well, if I can make my work tie into my life, then all of a sudden there isn't that need to even have that kind of concept for myself, if
Mm,
that makes sense. But that's
mm.
something that I'm seeing in my own work, is like getting to a place where I really enjoy it and learning what I'm passionate about. So I no longer have to feel like oh, I've got to work today, or oh, I've got to, do this. So,
Mm. I like that because it's indicative of the terms that we use, people using them differently. So if work life, if I need to find a balance because work is drudgery and life is fun and playful and relaxing and what I want to do, right? Like working for the weekend, right? There's this old song from the 80s, everybody's
there
working
is
for
a
the
song. That's a
weekend,
good
right?
song.
Right? Because it's this idea that, oh, this is stuff I have to do to pay my bills. But I can get through it to what I want to do. And of course, a lot of people, that is just their reality. But if you have a whole group of people who think, well, no, I want my whole life to be imbued with meaning. Of course, there's going to be drudgery and we all have to do dishes and things like that. But, and there's aspects of my work that are like doing the dishes thing. Everybody has to do stuff they don't like to do. But on the whole, right, I'm passionate about, or I enjoy, or I see the value, or I'm growing, or there's something enjoyable about, maybe the majority of the work that I'm doing, then this idea of work-life integration, right? So that it's not this stark contrast. So if you have two people talking about work-life balance and one person's towards the end of their working career, age-wise, and somebody's at the beginning, they could be having a conversation using the same words, but having very different concepts attached to what that is, and then also attached to whether or not it's important.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree with that. And I like what you said too about you're not always going to like the work that you're doing, but I think even like for the things that might not be your favorite activities, but if you're passionate about your work and it ties into your work, well, at least you have that like that why that you're working
Right.
towards. Maybe I'm doing this work that I don't really enjoy, but it's tied to the deeper why. And like for me, I still caddy on the side, and sometimes I do some catering jobs, and I wouldn't necessarily say that that's something that I'm passionate about, but it's necessary because that's the area of my life that I'm at. And I think it is important, but I still feel like okay, I'm doing these things, but it's tied to a deeper purpose because this is where I want to go.
Mhm.
So I think yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is that you might not always love the work that you're going to do, but having that deeper why just makes it easier for you to push through when things get tough.
I absolutely agree with that. Because you're right. I mean, like, even like, I mean, I suppose some people like doing dishes when I think about being at home, but I don't like doing them. But I do like having a clean house, right? I do like having this stuff to eat off of. And so when we reframe the parts that are harder for us at our work or things that we just simply don't enjoy, but we see that we're not going to be able to have what it is we want if we don't spend time on those areas that are necessary, but maybe not in our wheelhouse, or we just have to do at this moment because it is in service of this whole, right? And so, if we think I'm only going to do things that I enjoy, you won't be able to do anything because everything that you enjoy, um, there are costs associated with it. And yeah, yesterday was a great day for me. It was very busy. I was exhausted. I don't like working that much. I love working, but I don't like being exhausted where I have nothing to give to my family at the end of the day. But that's just, like you said, a season. It happens. That part was not enjoyable. The other parts were enjoyable. And sometimes that's just going to be the case. But taking the whole as to the passion, what we want to be doing, and I think it's also really important when we think about when I'm in a job that is not my passion and I don't see it as contributing to what it is that I want to do, because maybe I don't know what I want to do, how we deal with that, how people from different generations deal with disappointment, being
Mm,
disappointed in themselves, disappointed in maybe their culture, maybe false promises, like when we think about housing and other sorts of ideas, pay rates. I thought I would be doing this and getting this kind of reward. I'm doing that and getting that kind of reward.
hmm. Yeah.
So how do you see these gaps showing up at work through your work and what you've been doing going to organizations? What are the kinds of gaps that you see?
Yeah. I mean, I think that some of the things that we're seeing, the biggest things that are coming up is Gen Z, like I was looking at some surveys from the past that I conducted, and they were small surveys, but one of the biggest things that I think Gen Z sees with more experienced professionals is this idea that they're resistant to change. Like that's the big thing that seems to be coming up for them. But I think and then for obviously I shared about what the more experienced generations see in Gen Zers, but I think the main issue that comes up in the workplace. And I like whenever, we've had a conversation where you share, I don't believe in the labels, is we look at the generations as absolutes, meaning you are saying that all Gen Zers are lazy or all Gen Xers are closed minded. And I think each of those things that we see that happen in the workplace where people get labeled a certain way, like to a certain extent, some of that is true, but then also like some of that's false. There are some Gen Zers who are very lazy, unfortunately. Like I've seen it for myself, and then there are some Gen Zers who are incredibly hardworking. So it's about how do you get the people that are lazy to move closer to the people that are more hardworking. So I think being able to understand in the workplace and really understand that it's not just like just because they're a Gen Zer, they're this way, and this way. Like for me, I'm collaborating with someone right now who's a Gen Xer, and he is way more skilled with AI. He's way more skilled with a lot of the like if you ask me to create a website and do all the detail oriented things with creating a website, like that's something that would drain me. But he's really good with a lot of the technology things. Whereas for me, I'm a, I'm a Gen Zer, but I'm not necessarily that's not my favorite thing to do. I like marketing, I like doing the speaking, those type of things. So I think there's this notion that all Gen Zers are good with technology or all Gen Zers are this, but it really depends on the individual. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing going into organizations, being able to help them understand that and have more of those conversations, like onboarding conversations with their employees before they get into a project and then they start seeing the issues come up. I think it's important to address what are your expectations? How do you like to work? Because it's not really about necessarily the generation, it's about the individual. And some of the things might be true about them, and then other things might not resonate with them. So,
I absolutely agree. Um, I'm certain that some Gen Zers are lazy, and so are some Generation Xers and baby boomers and millennials, right? Laziness knows no age, and neither does being industrial, being industrious. We have people who are hardworking, people who are loyal. We have people who are disloyal, and people who will are team players and people who are selfish. And this just seems to be a part of the human condition. And people just show up in different ways at different times, right? So you might be not very hardworking right now and turn a corner. Vice versa, you could be very hardworking and burn out or decide that you have different sorts of priorities. And so I think, I 100% agree that it's just who am I? Who is this person that I'm working with? Not what age are they, but who is this particular person? What are their values and what are their set of expectations? And yet, I think that, of course, we do ourselves a disservice if we don't consider the the marketing that person has experienced, as you started with, the entertainment that that person has consumed, the messages the PSAs that are out there for that generation, um, these things that we hear from a very young age, how they resonate with us. And that becomes sort of the backdrop of how we go out into the world. And so there is something to these stereotypes, but I think it's thin. Yet it's there, but it's thin. But I think we make it thick. Like we make up these big gaps. And so I also hear from leaders, how do I work with that person? That person, those young people, they are so, what I hear a lot is emotional. They're very emotional or entitled, or they don't want to work. Those are the three big that I hear. And then from the younger ones, younger generations, I hear things like they minimize me. They don't listen to me. They, um, I'm not welcomed. Um, they they don't know and they don't think they need to learn, right? So again, they're stuck in their ways. And so we have these repeat because they don't want to learn and they don't want to move. Those are some of the big gulfs that I've experienced.
Yeah, that definitely sounds familiar.
So, from your perspective, as a Gen Zer, what, when you come into organizations, how do you how do you work with pe older generations to either help them see or help them navigate the world, the reality in which they find themselves? And then I'm going to ask you the same for about people of your own age.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. Typically the way I start is by first showing the statistics around. I think sometimes generational issues can almost be perceived as not really impacting the company's bottom line and they're
Mm.
more just communication issues. But I really just start by sharing what are the statistics behind generational differences and how is that impacting the company's bottom line and just other areas of the workplace. Then it's about what we were discussing going into the root causes. Before we get into any discussion around what are the challenges that your organization's facing, understanding, well, where might these challenges be coming from for Gen Zers? So it can better help them understand, okay, that makes sense where that's coming from. It's not to say that Gen Zers are necessarily right. It's just to show where their thoughts coming from. Because something I'm really careful of is being that person who's saying, Gen Z is right all the time, and here are all the reasons that you're wrong. Because there are certain areas where I genuinely think that Gen Z needs to improve. Um, but I think so that starting going into the roots and then going into the actual discussion around, what are some of the challenges you're facing, and then looking at, well, what are the solutions? Here are the things that we can solve. And it's definitely very customized, I think, because every organization is different and they have their
Mhm.
own challenges and their own unique experiences with Gen Zers. So I try and change it up depending on the organization. But I think I try to bring in as much practical solutions as possible, going from starting the interview process, being onboarded, then going into, well, okay, now they're on their first project. Feedback is a very important thing for Gen Zers because we've lived in a world of transparency, all this access to information in our own lives. So we almost expect there to be not as many secrets because of that. So I think transparency is incredibly important. And then it's really about going from that to, what are career development is one of the main reasons that Gen Zers come to companies, and lack of career development is the main reason that they leave companies. I think that's a McKinsey study. I don't want to take credit for that, but that's one of the main things that we've seen come up. So it's about, well, what are some of the career development opportunities that you can help Gen Zers with? Because if it's the reason they come and if it's not there, it's the reason they leave, and that's something that we really need to focus on. So that's really some of the stuff that I'm talking about when I go into organizations, talking about Gen Zers.
So, right, this idea of transparency and telling people what they need to know and not keeping secrets unless it's absolutely necessary. I think if you're going to not disseminate information, you have to have a really good reason rather than the other way around, right? I have to have a really good reason to tell people this information. Um, so feedback, that can be a sticking point, giving people feedback when they are missing the mark in some kind of way. Uh, is there any sort of typical advice you give about how to speak well to somebody that is Generation Z so that will resonate with them and help them develop?
Yeah, in terms of feedback,
Hmm.
I would say first is making it frequent, but again, it depends on the individual. But I think being, even if it's a quick check-in every week or every 2 weeks and just, sharing with them whether you're on a conversation with that person, giving feedback for that, because I think learning is obviously important. I don't think just for Gen Z, but for every generation. I think making it frequent, making it specific, I think is really important too, because the more detailed the guidance, the quicker Gen Z can complete tasks. And that matters because Gen Z values efficiency. Like we've grown up in a world where it's the mindset is why do it this way when we can do it this way faster and more efficiently. So I think being specific just leads to more efficiency. I think making it personal growth focused, the more that you can tie your feedback to their own development, not just the teams, I think it boosts engagement and motivation for Gen Zers. And then also making it conversational. I think collaboration over hierarchy. So Gen Z, again, they respond best when feedback feels like a conversation rather than a top-down directive. So inviting questions, dialogue, it helps them understand. And I think questions, when you're giving feedback, questions are really valuable because if you ask them questions, they could answer, they can come up with the answers themselves. And I think that just boosts confidence even more by asking, guided questions about where they're at, what they need help with. So I think sometimes it feels really good to be able to say, oh, I came up with that on my own. And that's what I think makes really good life coaches or business coaches is their ability to ask the right questions. So those are some of the things I think with feedback that could be helpful for Gen Zers, but I'm sure there's other ones out there too that are very helpful.
Oh no, that sounds absolutely fantastic. What I think is so wonderful about thinking about different generations and what they want and what they expect and what helps them thrive is that a lot of times other generations want that too, like just instead of the top down do it, this is why, right? This is why this matters. Giving the why instead of just the command, it used to be like with command and control style, the leader says that you do it, full stop. But most people want to know the why, right? If you tell most adults why we need to do this, even if they don't really like it, they'll be able to do it because they're adults, right? They can, but if you just say do it in a vacuum and you don't know why you're doing this, you're not going to be able to do it as well if you don't have the full understanding. And so I think when we stop and we listen to what other generations what they value, what they think is going to help them grow and develop and be a good colleague, everybody benefits, right? The whole organization benefits from curious questions, as you were just talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you were saying about the why, and this example might be more towards the negative, but I think it's an important thing to bring. Like I read a LinkedIn post the other day. I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but Steve Kerr was, I mean, he's the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. He's been on so many different championship teams, but I think if I have it correctly, he was just talking about Greg Popovich, the old coach of the Spurs, and just how good he was at being able to have conversations. And like he was talking about a time when he had to get benched. Steve Kerr was getting benched for the game, and he was in the starting lineup for a long time. And then Greg Popovich had to have a conversation with him. But what Greg Popovich did is he told him, and he did it in such a respectful way, in which he said, like, this is what's going on. This is why I'm doing it, and this is the outlook for the team. And I think in terms of whether that's positive for this is why we're doing this, or if it's something maybe it's constructive feedback. This is why I think being able to give that context and being transparent is incredibly important. And obviously, it wasn't the news that he probably loved receiving, but it resonated with him enough to be able to share it years later. And I think being able to not only say this is what's happening, but this is why it's happening is super important, kind of to what you were speaking to.
Do you find any resistance from the older workforce of giving that why? Or does that, as soon as you say it, they're like, yeah, of course I should do that if I'm not doing that?
Honestly, I'd have to think about that, but I haven't come across too much resistance in that idea. But there is this notion where I think some people because other people they understand it 100%. So I think some Gen Xers and some baby boomers are definitely they understand they're very supportive of Gen Zers, but then there's some where it's this idea of, well, this is how I had to do it. I never had to ask any questions about why I had to do something. Like they should just know that I'm asking you to do this. You don't need to know why. I think that's something that's come up a few times, not a lot, but again, not everyone in those generations has had that reaction. But I think that's one of the things that I've seen that's come up is, why do I have to do this if I didn't have to ask that question when I was younger? So.
Mm. And I think that's all about talking about expectations, right? And what is our goal? What do you want to achieve? So if you want to achieve communication, if you want to achieve good outcomes in your team, then we need to speak in the language of the person in front of us. And I don't mean slang language. I know we're talking about generations, but if what's going to help me is giving me an understanding, then as the leader, why would I not do that? just what is that resistance in me? And that's where curious questions for leaders, it always starts with the self. Why am I resisting this? Why do I think this is unnecessary or hand-holding or whatever kind of negative spin I put on it? If this extra 10 seconds of giving somebody the real why actually helps them, which means it helps the team and helps me and helps it outcomes, why am I finding resistance to doing this?
Definitely.
So what about a Generation Z? What kind of resistance or gaps are you finding the people in your fellow generation, and what kind of advice do you give them so that they can be good colleagues and succeed?
So you're saying with Gen Z, what are the resistance that they have towards older generations?
Or when they show up to work, like what are some kind of like policies or procedures or things that they kind of come up across and they're like, no, that they don't like, uh, but that maybe they need to accept or soften or learn the game of business so that, and I mean this in the best possible way, there's a structure, right? Every organization has a structure that you got to figure out the parts and how to progress.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I would say sometimes I think with Gen Z, there is this notion, and again, some Gen Zers, some aren't like this, but with some Gen Zers, I think there is this idea that they are going to love everything that they should love everything that they do right out of the gate. And I've noticed that a few times with some people is like, I don't like, I'm not passionate about it or I'm not interested in it. So I don't want to do it. But again, as we've talked about, I think there are naturally some things that you might not necessarily enjoy about some of the stuff that you're doing with your work at a specific organization. But I think being able to understand, well, what are the skills that I can learn, or what are the one or two things or the skills that this job is providing me that I can really focus on. And maybe even if I'm not at this company long term, maybe I can use that skill, hone in on it, and then be able to use that towards another job in the future. But I think there is this idea of going into a company and expecting them to enjoy everything right out of the gate. That would be one of the things that's come up.
Yeah, I think that's really strong. And I think, like for people who go to college, chances are not every college course you took resonated with you or that you enjoyed, but you wanted the whole, you wanted the degree, right? And so
Mhm.
you have, for me, I'm not a math person, so my math and statistics, well,
Me neither.
I think they're very important, and I'm not saying they're not important. I'm just saying it's very difficult for me. But I did them because I wanted this other prize, right? But what you said, thinking about a job, I mean, I talk to people all the time, and a lot of times their first jobs are like McDonald's, many people maybe don't want to be there, but it's really interesting to hear if you're present and thinking, I can learn anywhere I'm at the relationships, the networking that has been built from those first jobs, or the skills, the customer service, the what to do, what not to do, what I like, what I don't like. And all of those are about building who you are as a professional, right? But an idea that I should have or I should enjoy, there's pain, right? Life is filled with pain, and work will be filled with pain and joy and wonderfulness and just the everyday. But that expectation that things were going to be hard, like really hard, and that's normal. That's a normal thing that things are going to be hard.
Definitely. And I like what you said too about there's things that you don't like. I think you learn too about I think it's just as valuable to learn what you don't like as it is what you do because, okay, now you know. Like for me, I knew I wasn't necessarily interested in becoming a real estate agent. So now I can kind of cross that off. And now that's one of the things that I recognize, like, I don't need to go pursue that again. Maybe down the line, I become more interested in it. But I think even in those jobs where you recognize, okay, I don't like this, I do like that. Like you learn just as much from the things that you don't like as well, and it can lead you closer to what you do like. So that's just something I picked up on from what you were saying.
Yeah. So what else, for those of us who are very curious about the world of Gen Z and what they want, what do you think needs to happen so that the world of work will be more welcoming to the newest generation at work, right? Alpha is still a little ways off, but we've got our Gen Zers. So what do you think needs to happen so that they will be able to succeed and so that we all succeed because we succeed together?
Yeah, I no, that's a great question. I guess I have like a little anecdote too that I've been thinking about recently. So I don't know if you've ever experienced any bad drivers before, like just if you're driving down the street. But I remember a few weeks ago, I was driving and I just kept thinking like, why is this person, taking so long? Like they just aren't driving well. And I was so focused on that. And then I get to a stoplight and I'm behind them and I notice on the back of their car it says new driver, please be patient. And
Mhm.
it's like a little bumper sticker. And all
Right.
of a sudden it reminded me, there's a reason I'm saying this, but all of a sudden it reminded me of at the time when I was a new driver and I was not necessarily good. And all of a sudden I had empathy for that person because they literally had something on their car that told me, okay, they're a new driver. So I think in the workplace that everyone has their own bumper sticker about like what they're going through,
Mhm.
what they're learning, what they might need to improve, and everyone has their own backstory from previous jobs and previous experiences that might have shaped the way that they view work. So I think being able to uncover, well, what is that thing? Like what was happening at previous jobs that have shaped the way that you view work, or what does motivate you in your work? So I think reverse mentorship seems like a huge topic right now,
Mhm.
where younger generations are able to mentor more experienced generations in different areas, and
Mhm.
then where more experienced generations can mentor younger generations. And I think that all comes at the crux of having the conversations and learning from each other. So I think being able to, ask those questions and get a better sense, obviously within reason and understanding their professional experiences beforehand, but I think the more time you can set aside to, because I also think if Gen Zers are able to reverse mentor more experienced professionals, like they're able to learn fast, like they're able to learn things that they might have never even considered, and that helps people, learn and innovate. And then more experienced generations, if they're teaching younger employees, Gen Zers, they get to learn from the experiences and mistakes of other people. And I think it's important to learn from your own mistakes, but I think if you can learn from other people's mistakes, it can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, to learn from other people's mistakes because you can move faster. So I think that's really what needs to happen more and more is this idea of reverse mentorship and being able to understand, well, what is this person's experience? What has shaped them in the workplace before? So that I can be a little bit more empathetic towards them and understand their story, as opposed to saying, like, I can't understand why this person is, handling work this particular way, just like how I was when I was like, I can't understand why the driver isn't moving or anything like that. But once I was able to see, I was able to recognize, okay, there's a reason for that. So now that they have that discussion, they can work through those expectations. So hopefully that makes sense.
I love that. I love mentoring and reverse mentoring. It just seems like such an opportunity when you say people are interested in career development and how they can progress. That is an opportunity for somebody who's been there for a while to be recognized as a valuable employee that can be going into the mentoring program to mentor other people. But when we think about belonging, somebody who's just now coming in to an organization, they've got so much great information about um, what they've been learning and their own experiences and what they see to be able to capitalize on that, not only for the learning for older people at work, but as a way to show them, we want you here. Belonging is so very important to feel like you're wanted. And what better way than I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear about your experience. I want to learn from you because I recognize you have valuable things for me to learn. And that is a way, that's a kind of currency um, to help people invest and to help. I could imagine if you are the reverse mentor, then you're going to be more likely to, first of all, you're going to be able to network within that organization because you're going to know more people. Therefore, you're going to be more likely to ask questions because you are seen and see yourself as a valuable employee in this organization.
Definitely agree. Very, very well said. And I think that's incredibly important, everything that you just mentioned about reverse mentorship. So yeah, I could not agree more.
So I believe in them in theory, and of course, I've known some programs. Have you set any up or seen any success from them?
I haven't, so I've still been implementing and ideating around the best ways to do reverse mentorship. And I've thought about things such as going into companies. There's more informal because sometimes people might say, well, we don't have the time for this. But I think something as simple as having two whiteboards set up, and one is, it can be anonymous, and then you have one board that says, here are some ideas for how to make the company run more smoothly, or here's some ideas for our company. And then people can just throughout the day, if they have a spare minute, they can write down, here's some ideas. And then people walk by and they say, oh, wow, this is a really good idea. Let's bring it up at our next company meeting. And then you might have people, and anyone can write on any of the boards, but then you have people that might, you know, they might have just made a mistake or something came up. And if they feel comfortable enough to share what that mistake is, again, anonymously, they can just write, lesson I just learned, or something like that, so that when people walk by, they could say, okay, that's good to know because I'm going into a call where I might be faced with a similar thing that this person was faced with. So I think that is is one way without having to deal with the constraints of time that reverse mentorship can come into play. But I'm definitely still working through understanding and better creating like an actual program around reverse mentorship. So
Yeah, I've been thinking about that as well. With time constraints, it's something really to consider. But I think there's just so much benefit. I think as we really listen to and it's just such a great opportunity to grow. It does save time when we're not spinning our wheels or, we just tend to think that the way we like things is the way things are, but the way we like things and what we see is from our limited perspective. And so the broader perspective we have, the better we're going to be in business for whatever our customers or products are that we are serving or developing.
definitely.
Mm. All right, so Will, so my last question for you is,
Yeah.
as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that they will thrive and flourish?
Great question. I think the more face-to-face conversations that can be had, the better. I think it's so easy there's so many different communication channels nowadays and ways to communicate that sometimes, an issue that I see come up is that if there's a difficult conversation that needs to be had, or something important needs to be addressed, that it can sometimes be addressed over email or over Slack or over text message. So I really do think that for young adults entering the workforce, the more times when you recognize that there is an important conversation that needs to be had, whether it's about promotions or just something that you just need to address with someone within the workplace, is always defaulting to the in person, I think is really important. And I think for companies, just being able to do that is incredibly important moving forward. And I think it's just better for people. Obviously, being able to communicate via Slack and email and places like that for different things like navigating meetings, of course, that makes total sense. So I know your question was about the future of the workforce, but I do think part of the future is still being able to adopt things that were used in the past that might have been lost.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the things that I think moving forward would be really helpful, because there is conflict that comes up and there are discussions that need to be had. It's just about being able to use the right tool, because we're in this modern age where there's so many different ways to communicate, that I think being able to refer to this way of communicating could be really helpful when addressing conflict or addressing potential solutions for organizations.
I love your answer because as I asked the question, like, oh shoot, I want to talk to Will about conflict because we've just
Yeah,
been talking about generations, but I think that's really important. So we think about all the different tools we have in the age that we live in, the age of AI or the age of technology, but we are humans living in this time. And so being able to select what is the right tool for the right circumstance. And when it has to deal with conflict or a difficult issue with a person, usually the right tool is going to be face to face. However you can make that happen, or Of course, there are constraints sometimes, but that's a great message and something to think about. What is the right tool to solve the issue? So what is the issue?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Will, thank you so much. And I'm so happy that you're doing this work. And I say go out and find Will at the NextGen Playbook. And you can find out more about him and the services that he offers if you want someone to come into your organization and help you with your issues. Will's your guy.
Thank you so much, Mary, for having me join. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
You too. Well, take care. Will, thank you so much for the work that you're doing because, as we all know, this is a real issue that we're facing, generations at work not being able to communicate. And so that you saw this gap and that you're out there trying to help younger and older workers manage this gap. So thank you for that work, Will, and for a wonderful conversation. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And I am excited to talk about my new book, which is Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset. And so Will is one of the podcast guests that we've had this year in 2026 talking about generational issues. And there will be more to come, more guests talking about generation issues in between episodes of just the normal issues of conflict that we have at work. So we do have new episodes every Tuesday. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.